So this video is going to focus on the cognitive interview technique. Now you can see that the spec specifically notes that you need to understand the influence of the cognitive interview and the ethical interview techniques. It is worth noting though that the 2018 exam paper, the 16 marker within the criminal perspective, so the big essay, was on cognitive and ethical interview techniques. So it has come up in terms of a 16 marker so far. So the cognitive interview was actually designed to improve the accuracy of eyewitness testimony in a way to support the police in getting more valid information from either victims or witnesses of crime. So again, the aim of this is that this is something that was developed for the police to be able to use as an active technique when they were interviewing or questioning these witnesses. Now, it's worth noticing that it's called the cognitive interview because it's based on psychological research into memory. So it's this idea of using techniques that we know enhance memory and applying those to the real world in order to be able to improve the validity and the effectiveness of eyewitness testimony. So Fisher and Geisman reviewed the relevant research on memory, and they found that people remember events when they were provided with retrieval cues. Therefore, they developed the cognitive interview, which essentially uses 4 techniques to improve the accuracy of eyewitness testimony. Now, these are report everything, so the interviewer will encourage the reporting of every single detail in the event, even if it seems unimportant. Reinstate the context or context reinstatement, which is trying to mentally recreate an image of the situation, including details of the environment, such as what the weather was like, and the individual's emotional state, so such as how did you feel at the time of the incident. They might be asked to recall from a different order. So, for example, the witness might be asked to describe the scene in a different chronological order. So, for example, from the end to the beginning. Or they might be asked to recall from a changed perspective, so trying to mentally recreate the situation from different points of view. So, for example, what do you think that witness who stood around the corner at the time of the crime will have been able to see? Now, as well as these techniques, the witness is encouraged to relax, speak slowly, and the interviewers are told to specifically adapt the question to suit the needs of the individual witnesses. Now, Fisher in '87 actually added 3 additional features to the enhanced cognitive interview in order to be able to enhance the use of memory. Now, they said that participants or offenders or witnesses or victims or whoever's being interviewed shouldn't be interrupted at any point in part of the interview. There should also be no distractions present within the interview room in order to be able to allow them to concentrate. And they also suggested that police officers or whoever's doing the interview should be using active listening techniques, so keeping eye contact. They might nod their head, they might go and agree with bits of information as they're coming out in order to be able to encourage this retrieval of the memory so that the witness keeps talking. So in terms of an evaluation, well, the validity of the cognitive interview is very high because cognitive interview has actually been tested, and there are over 50 studies which suggest the accuracy of the cognitive interview in terms of enhancing the accuracy of eyewitness testimony. Now, the enhanced cognitive interview, where the witness might be unaware of the information that the interviewer may already know, also maximises the recall of that memory and allows us to give accurate details. Now, there's research support from this from Godden and Badley, who provide support for this idea of reinstating the context. Godden and Badley did an experiment on this idea of cue-dependent forgetting. So the idea that if we can reinstate cues that were present at the time of the encoding of the memory, it makes it easier for us to retrieve the memory. There are over 50 studies as well providing support for the cognitive interview, which therefore increases the validity of it. However, it's not actually used as widely by the police as we would like. So, for example, police don't seem to use this changing the perspective technique because they suggest that it's impossible for anybody to be able to state exactly what another person would have seen, particularly if they saw this from a different angle. And it seems to have practical problems because Maimon actually suggests that the cognitive interview has little or no effect, and therefore the research in the area is mixed, therefore meaning that the application of it is mixed across the police. Equally, it requires police personnel to be trained, which can be particularly expensive and time-consuming for forces. Some research evidence here. So Fisher did some research in '89 in order to test the validity of the cognitive interview, but using a field experiment, so think ecological validity. Now, they basically had 16 experienced police officers within Florida, and they conducted 2 interviews basically on 47 witnesses or victims of a shoplifting incident or a mugging incident. Now, 7 of these police officers were taught the cognitive interview technique, whereas 9 were told to use the standard basic interview technique as a control group. And what they did was they measured the increase in the facts given by the second type of interview compared to the first. Now, they found that the cognitive interview technique was 47% more accurate for witnesses in recalling details of the event compared to the standard interview. So therefore suggesting that the cognitive interview is useful and it does improve the accuracy of eyewitness testimony. It's worth noticing, though, that the control group were aware of the fact that they were in a control group and that the other police officers were trained to learn the cognitive interview technique. Therefore, their motivation to get things right and to recall extra pieces of evidence won't have been high within this study, and therefore that might have been a demand characteristic, for example, that affected the validity of these results. Just quickly having a quick look at the comparison of the two then, creates the standard interview and the cognitive interview. Obviously, the cognitive interview is focusing on this use of open questions, minimum distractions, no interruptions, actively listening to the witness, pausing after the question, allowing them to talk freely, etc. Whereas the standard interview had a period of free recall, but then there were specific questions asked afterwards. Now, Fisher again studied standard interviews conducted by real officers and basically said that the standard interview focused on this idea of closed questions, so yes or no, brief questions which may have yielded a brief response in terms of a lack of detail from the witnesses. Also, breaking, so having breaks within the interview, allowing for disruptions and things like that to take place. I've put a possible AO2 question if you want to pause and have a go at this. I've purposely kind of done a 6 marker here because if we remember that this was the 16 marker previously, it means that for me, and I'm not a betting woman, but I would be kind of preparing yourself at this point for a smaller, shorter answer question or potentially an 8 marker specifically on the use of the cognitive interview.